Welcome, Theatre Addicts. My name is Danielle Benson, and I'm here with Travis Bernhardt. His show is Unscriptured, and it is going to be playing at the Carousel Theatre at the Vancouver Fringe this year. So welcome, Travis.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. I believe you are currently in Victoria?
Yes, I'm in Victoria currently. I was in Saskatoon with the show and Edmonton Fringe as well. Currently in Victoria.
Doing Fringe there or just hanging out?
Doing Fringe, yeah, I'm doing Fringe in Victoria.
So that's 4 Fringes in one summer?
Yeah, there's 4 Fringes. It's 1 month-ish away. It's not so bad.
How has the Fringe treated the show so far? Is this the first iteration of this show, or is it a remount?
I did depends how you look at it. The very first version of it was as a duo thing in my improv duo, Chris and Travis. We did that in, I think, 2015, I want to say. And yeah, I think it was 2015. And that was not very similar to what I'm doing now, but it had, a couple of features that were the same. And then last year, 2017, I premiered this version at the Edmonton Fringe Festival. Did a short run there. And so that's where I guess it started at. And then the Toronto Clown Festival in June, and then this tour. So I've still probably only done the show about, 20 times maybe-ish, a little more than that now. But yeah, it's new. It's a new show.
Okay, so it's new, but it's not, this moment we're just coming off the first dress rehearsal. You've done it a couple of times. You're feeling solid. Yeah. Cool. But it's improv, I believe, so it's new every night anyway.
It is, and that's an interesting thing about it, is that figuring out how to put this, because it's improvised. I feel like I haven't gotten to this point yet, but I feel like there might almost be like a curve of it where it starts off kind of like, oh, it's sort of like this, then you kind of figure it out. And I wonder if this hasn't happened yet, but I wonder if at some point there's like a downward curve or something where you're kind of where you've done a lot of the stuff that you can do with the form, and then you have to kind of break it a little bit to make it more, more improv and less just kind of like, oh, I know how this goes kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm. You gotta keep surprising yourself.
Yeah, I feel like if it's too structured or it's too obvious what's going to work, then I feel like it loses some of the improvness. And I think that's good and bad. I think it's safer maybe because you kind of know what's going to happen, but I feel like it's less alive. So yeah, I don't know. We haven't got there yet. Still figuring it out.
And is this, how many people are in your show? Because the show description kind of almost makes it look like a one-man show. Is it a one-man show?
It is a one. Yeah, it's just myself.
One-man show doing improv. That must be very challenging.
Yes and no. I don't know. It doesn't feel. What makes it not feel that way is that it's not like I'm on stage just monologuing, or I'm not on stage, playing characters or whatever, and trying to sustain a story, which, everything's got its different challenges. But in this case, it's much more conversational because the audience is part of it. It's not that kind of theater, right? We are playing the game together of being in a church service for whatever the thing is. So it's not any more difficult to me than just having a conversation for an hour with somebody. That's not difficult. We improvise conversations all day, and so it sort of feels more like that to me a little bit.
That's a really good point. I hadn't thought of it like that. We do improvise all of our conversations every day.
Yeah.
Most.
Yeah. Well, I guess what I mean by that is if I was doing it to a camera, it might be difficult, but it's because I'm doing it with an audience, then there's always something to play with. There's always something to feed off of,
Mm-hmm. And so the premise of this play is that you are improvising a religion or a religious service. Can you tell me a bit more about
we
you're doing
we basically it is a improvised church service for a religion that is made up on the spot. So we'll get a suggestion, pens or something, and then we're off and running, and then we're singing songs and we're praying, and we're there's scripture, there's whatever church thing. It's very, very loosely structured around a Catholic service, but the more I've done it, the more that structure has just kind of fallen away a little bit, and now it's kind of just like what's gonna work, what do people seem to like. It's maybe less true to that structure than it was at the beginning, but I think that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's better. Otherwise, you would be sticking with a particular type of religion.
In a way, yeah. I mean, yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah, like it's pretty Western. It's pretty like Christian sort of based. I feel like I didn't feel qualified really to bring in elements from other cultures. I feel like this is the one that we grew up in. This is the one that we kind of have a sense of, even if we weren't church going. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So your audience is your congregation.
Yes.
So obviously they're participating because they are part of they're part of the reality of the show. Is it a high on audience participation? Are you going to be pulling people up on stage, or is it just kind of more suggestions, or?
Well, it's audience participation to the extent that any church service might be. Like, if we're singing the songs, then you're probably singing the songs. Somebody could get brought up on stage, depends on the context. It's participatory at the level that you want it to be participatory. I think that most people have like a very different idea of what they want to do for audience participation, and the show allows for that. I haven't had too much trouble with people being really difficult about it, or really just like subdued. It's generally not an issue, but it could be, and the show allows for that.
Well, it's fringe. People expect to be participating in some shape or form. It's just nice to know kind of the level, or that you get to choose, because you don't always get to choose if you're participating or not. So it's nice to know that, you get to navigate it with your comfort.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the way we start the show is, the way I start the show is there's a section in it about consent around participation, because as sensitive as you want to be as a performer, it can be difficult to gauge where somebody's at, right? Like, you might be talking to somebody and they might be, let's say it was slightly confrontational, say. And let's further say that like they're giving as good as they're getting. Maybe, could happen.
Yeah.
And so you might think to yourself, well, they're giving as good as they're getting. That means that they're okay with this, but they might actually they'd rather not. Like they might just, if they had a choice, they would just not do it, but they don't have any way of telling you not to do this, right? Like, and I think that's a bit of a problem, because it's sometimes we can tell, but when we can't tell what's up with somebody, then I think it's important to have a way out. And there's not a really perfect answer for that, but the answer that we have is I give people, I do this, this is something that first came up doing improv with Chris, where a woman was very courageous to come up after the show and be like, hey, like, love the show, but I couldn't take, people who I work with in the downtown east side, women, to see your show. I don't know if the audio is going to be bad because there's that thing happening out there.
No, well, it's not too awful.
Maybe that's better. So she said, I couldn't bring these women to the show because, there's a possibility that they might get touched, or even just interacted with in some way that they're not okay with. And that way that they're not okay with might be something that I might think is really innocent or doesn't have any significance. And so, which is a really good point. And so we have this thing which we came up with, Chris and I, would just like, if somebody wants to stop participating, they just do like this. So they don't have to say anything. They don't have to like, they can just be in the middle of the conversation and just do this. And then as soon as they do that, I immediately just go to somebody else. No questions asked. No, like, that I don't, double down on it. I don't investigate, what's up, or just move on. And I think it's helpful because it relaxes people in the audience a little bit, but also it means that audience members who are seeing participation with somebody else, they know that they have that out, as long as I make sure to remind them. Sometimes people need the reminder that it's possible. Knowing that they have that out makes them more likely to relax while they're watching the interaction, because audience members feel like anxious on behalf of other people in the audience, probably. So if it's, even if it's a conversation, if it's any kind of touch or whatever, even on the shoulder or something like that, give them that opportunity, which I think is helpful. I don't know if it's the perfect answer. I don't think there is one. Like, there's such a big power imbalance between the performer and the audience that, it distorts everything a little bit.
I love that. I think that is so fantastic, because as an audience member, I'm not always comfortable participating. But sometimes I want to participate even when I'm not comfortable, because I want to push my boundaries, right?
Sure.
So knowing that there's always that out, that just takes all the stress away. I think that's
yeah. I mean, I can't imagine that would be universal, but that's how I would feel, I think. And like at first when we came up with this, I thought to myself, well, there's something really beautiful about somebody pushing past their boundary and kind of like going for it, even if they're not totally comfortable. And what I thought was that by adding this, people would be like bailing out early, and then we would never get to that point, and we would lose these moments of people like pushing through it. But I think it's probably closer to what you just said, is that having that option allows people to push a little bit because they know they can get out if they need to. Whereas without that option, they might be doing something they're not comfortable with, and now they're kind of committed to it, right?
Yeah, or so they just want
to
start because they don't know where their line is,
Yeah, they don't want to commit to something necessarily, but if they can duck out anytime, then maybe that's a little safer. So I think I had it backwards, and in my experience of working with that is that I don't think it's done that. I don't think it's made people less likely to participate. I don't think it's made people kind of just bail out early. I can't really know that. There's no way to test it, but it doesn't seem like it's been a bad thing.
Well, I'm not a big fan of being pulled up on stage, but I do really appreciate the interplay that happens, especially in Fringe and smaller shows, between audience and performers. I think that's fantastic. So great idea. I hope more performers do it, actually, because to have that kind of consent is great.
I encourage other performers to steal it and use it in the shows, like, or make up their own version of that, right? I don't know, just the idea of informed consent is interesting to me as well, right? Like, because we want to, as theater makers, we want to preserve the mystery and the surprise.
You said in your write-up that it was, so as an atheist, you're kind of poking fun at yourself, and like, what's the...
Well, I think, I mean, I don't know. It's a bit of both. Like, the concept from the get-go is obviously a little bit critical of religion, but I don't think it really is, because there's no what I say, there's no strong philosophical underpinning to the religions that we come up with on the spot, right? Like, and I mean, I guess you could argue that that is itself a kind of a critique, but because you could argue if the religion as invented on the spot sort of is the same in practical terms, then you would wonder then what's the point of having, like a quote unquote real religion. But I just don't think it works that way, because I think that part of what makes a religion work is the history, and that without the history, you're missing one of the core parts of the engine that makes it run. I mean, there are, debates around that, because obviously every religion starts somewhere, and, we have recent religions, quote unquote, like Scientology maybe, where it's technically, I guess, a religion somehow, legally, somehow, I think. but obviously is just, you know, some science fiction writer's fabrication, you know, based on his imagination and whatever time he spent in the, you know, secret societies or whatever, that kind of a thing. And yeah, and I think also, like, in recent times you see a lot of I don't know how it's probably always been thus, but it seems like we're, you know, there's a lot of cult activity in the 20th century, and just I feel like that's obviously an invented religion, kind of like the line between like what's a cult and what's a religion is kind of fuzzy. So in that sense, yeah, it could be could arguably be considered as a critique of religion, but I don't really see it that way, because I don't have the show itself doesn't really have much to say about anything that I think is at the core of religion. So when religious people have come to see the show, I think as far as I know, nobody's been offended or felt like it was like a critique of that. And it's certainly it's not a satire. I don't believe it's satirical. And somebody could disagree with that, I suppose, but it doesn't feel that way to me. Yeah, I see the show honestly as it's all the things I just said, but it's more of a gentle critique of my own atheism, but I don't hammer that either. Like that's soft pedaled in the show. There's not there's not anything. I never say that, for example. I mean, none of this is said. None of this is said explicitly. This is sort of like subtext, I guess. But yeah, I think it's much more of a critique for me personally of atheism because of how fun the show can be, right? Like, it's like the show is fun, and we do get into some, like, I don't know, activities or whatever that are, I think, silly the way that we do them, but there's something valuable to them. And I think that the show is ultimately about the idea of collective joy, and I feel like atheism doesn't have a lot to say about that, or you know, sort of secular culture generally doesn't have a lot to say about that, at least not in a very healthy way. Mm-hmm. And, you know, we could argue that, you know, traditional religion doesn't have much to say about that either. But I think there's something there, right? There's something in the religious impulse that needs to be addressed, and I think shouldn't be thrown out with the kind of philosophical bathwater. There's no, like, there's no attempt to answer questions like, you know, why are we here? You know, why is there something rather than nothing? What made the universe? You know, like, is there, you know, I don't know, any of the traditional questions that religion might be in some sense an attempt to answer. This show doesn't do that. Ultimately, it's just a goofy improv show is what it is. And I think that if it's fun for people, then that's great. But I'm reluctant to put too much weight on it. You know,
like, fair enough.
You know, but I do think about that stuff a little bit. I also wonder about, you know, just issues of like, you know, is it okay for me to do the show? Like, what makes it okay for me to do this show, to use these sort of kind of adapted rituals, or I think what makes it okay is that it's kind of like out there in the common kind of like, you know, white people Western headspace. But when I say white people, I think, well, the songs that you sing in it are the melodies of Black music. There's When the Saints Go Marching In, Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. And that sort of, I question that sometimes. I use them because they are well known. But I do sometimes wonder, just like, what makes it okay to do this? Why is it okay to sing these songs? And all I can say is that I don't think, and it's hard because the Fringe Festival is a very white experience. There's not a lot of Black audience at a Fringe Festival, and a lot of Black performers. I think that somebody who came in, much like the people who have come in who are religious, who have come into the show and seem fine, I think that people who are more closely associated with like black churches, especially in American South, if they saw the show, I don't think they would be hurt. Is my theory. I'm guessing that. That's just a bit of a projection, I guess. But the way that it's set up, I don't imagine it would be the case.
Just on a lighter note, what is your favorite thing about Fringe? And what are you looking forward to at the Vancouver Fringe?
Oh, I don't know. I haven't looked at the schedule. I don't know what's coming. I know Gossamer Obsessions is coming, and I really love their sketch show, so I recommend that. I think John Bennett's doing a show, and he's great. I think my favorite thing about Fringe is the accessibility of the artists. So if you want to meet somebody who, who did a show, they're probably around, and you can talk to them. And they're around for the week, basically. So you have lots of chances to sort of seek them out and that kind of a thing. The shows are often smaller, so you're not like, who's that one person in that cast of 20? It's more like it's something more personal. So something the show is usually about something for that person, and so you can there's something to connect over a little bit. Whereas I think that like the odds of you going to like a theater show just at whatever, and then just like having a chance to just hang out and meet the playwright or whatever is not super common. But in Fringe, it's very common. Like people are usually writing, producing, starring in their own work. I also feel like the Fringe allows for the creation of great work. I think that the Fringe puts on better theater than what you'll find at your regular theater season at your local whatever. Not universally, and certainly won't be as big budget, and certainly there are some projects that people do at the big theaters that are just not reproducible in the Fringe because of economics. But I would say that those are the minority, and that by and large, if you're smart about it and if you take some risks, that the theater you'll find at the Fringe is both cheaper and better than what you'll find at, the big theaters in town. And I don't know why that is. There's probably a lot of reasons that people who have studied it more could tell you. But yeah, there's something about theater as status symbol versus the kind of like theater that's actually about what people care about and that they're making because they need to or because they mean it. And it's really hard to get that kind of work produced because it costs a lot of money and people aren't going to want to, produce a show that doesn't have like some sort of big name behind it or some sort of franchise or, that kind of a thing. But the Fringe doesn't have that problem. The Fringe is the person's making it themselves and they don't have to pass a gatekeeper, right? It's lottery. And I think that's why Fringe gets a bad reputation because of all the bad work that comes through because of that situation. But it's also what means that the work is good. So I think, I think Fringe is good because the work is, I think, with a few notable big exceptions, I think it's the best theater you're likely to see. And it's cheap and it's accessible to artists of some means. I mean, you have to have a little bit of money to get started. I mean, that's a barrier for sure. But it's less of a barrier than in other cases.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
So what would you say to people who are thinking about coming to see your show? What's your hook? Or
I mean, the hook is right in the type. If the concept appeals to you, you'll probably like it. If the idea of an improvised church service for religion that I make up on the spot sounds like a fun time to you, then come to see the show. And if that doesn't seem like fun to you, then, I don't know what to tell you. I would say ignore how cerebral I am in this interview, because when I'm doing the show, it's a different story. But there's not a lot to talk. There's not a lot to talk about as far as that's concerned. I would say that if you ask me to talk about the show, you get this. But if you ask me to do the show, you get something very different.
Maybe a better question then would be, how do you want people to feel when they come to your show?
Oh, that's a little easier. Yeah, I think that like my ultimate goal is for people to leave feeling just ecstatic, and to be surprised by how much joy they can feel over something completely ridiculous, and maybe to wonder, why that is.
I think that's a beautiful message. Surprisingly ridiculous joy. Sounds good to me.
Yeah, come on down.
All right, well, thank you so much. My name is Danielle Benson. I have been here with Travis Bernhardt, who is the performer and writer improviser of Unscriptured at Carousel Theatre at the Sears Vancouver Fringe Festival. Thanks so much for being with us and taking time out of the Victoria Fringe to chat to me today.
Thank you for having me. This was really nice.